Is the C6 merely a reskinned C5? Let's dive in. So I was laying in bed a couple nights ago and this video idea kind of popped in my head. And I don't mean to start a controversy or C5 or C6 war or a heated debate whether or not the C6 is a lazy design, nothing like that. But more so to spread awareness of the interchangeability of the parts for both C5 versus C6. Maybe save you a headache, save you some money. Maybe you learn a little something or two. I'll briefly go over the major differences. There are quite a few major differences between the C5 and C6, of course. But what really got me thinking about this idea of this video was that every generation from C1 to C8 between each one has been a huge departure. Pretty much from ground up, from C1 to C2, C2 to C3, huge difference, C3 to C4, totally ground up. C4 to C5, same thing, totally redesigned. C6 to C7 again, and obviously the C8. But going from a C5 to C6, the changes are very marginable. And I thought that was very interesting. I'm not really sure why. Perhaps the Corvette team knew they had lightning in a bottle with the C5 platform. It's an amazing platform, and why try to mess with that? Then I thought maybe the cost of developing the C5 was so much they didn't want to, hemorrhage any more money. But if you look at the story on the C5, how it came to be, they made that car on a shoestring budget, very, very affordable ground up design. And I have a video on that if you're curious somewhere in my library about the C5 inception. It's pretty cool. But in my opinion, the C5 is a solid track weapon, so no need to reinvent the wheel. Also, real quick, if you're watching this as a C6 owner, I love the C6. I used to have one. Awesome car, not dogging the C6 at all. This is simply just an observation. And one more quick side note, I'm pretty much comparing the 04 C5 to the 05 C6. Those are the back-to-back years, if you will, from generation change. Of course, the C6 changed a lot as it went. Introduction to Grand Sport, Z06, Z01. Those are their own separate animals in their own separate way. And that'll be a whole different video at some point. So the major differences from the C5 to the C6, from the 04 to 05, power plant, of course, and then from the LS1 or LS6 respectively to the LS2. Bump in horsepower from the base C5, roughly 50 horsepower, very, very good motor. LS2 has very, very minor differences, which is a video for a whole separate time. The rest of the drivetrain, if you will, pretty much remained untouched. The body panels, of course, were sculpted to be a lot more rigid and aggressive. The interior had huge improvements from the C5, both fit and finish and technology, but still at the time not on par with its competitors. The HUD was very similar, one color option, green. The resolution was slightly increased and some information was also slightly tweaked. The introduction of a nav GPS system was the first time that's ever happened in the Corvette history. That was probably one of the biggest changes for the interior going into the C6. The rear exhaust still had a quad tip design in the middle. The mufflers are kind of rearranged, but very similar in design. The rear tail lights kept their iconic round shape, went from a more oval to more round shape, if you will. But perhaps the most extreme change from the C5 to the C6 was the omission of the pop-up headlights. And there is a lot of controversy. Some people say the Corvette died with the non-pop-up headlights. I don't know. I do like the pop-up headlights, but I have nothing against the static style, plastic enclosed headlights. They work just fine. So you get the gist. Those are the main differences of the C5 to C6. Now we're going to get into the similarities between the two and interchangeable parts. Now, some of these parts don't share the same part number between the C5 and C6, but in fact they are exactly the same part. GM just did this for, I guess, uniformity for their brand new model. It makes sense. And there's quite a few. And if I missed any of these, please leave in the comments below so we can help each other out. It's almost impossible to get everything right on the video. I work almost 2 jobs. I have a little baby, and I got a wife I got to take care of, I got a house I got to take care of. But I do my best to get the most factual information out to you guys when I can. So starting with the frame, they're both used a almost identical hydroformed frame, steel frame. I can't seem to find any differences between the C5 and C6 hydroformed frame itself. I'll get into some little differences where things mount to, but the frame itself is pretty similar, if not the exact same one. All the subframe mounts are virtually exactly the same. The wheelbase is different by about 2 inches. That's due to the position of the rear control arms in the back. The frame wasn't modified at all. It's simply they moved where they mount back a couple inches. The channeling around the door jambs were changed ever so slightly. Now the frame just in front of the front wheels is modified ever so slightly to be shorter. It's not so much they had to modify the entire frame itself, but just kind of shorten it, if you will. But it's pretty much the exact same frame. And so I guess that is one difference I did find between the two, so I'm mistaken. Now here's about 16 items that are identical that you can interchange between the two Corvettes. That's quite a bit for a generational change. For instance, the C7 to C8 shares 1, the C6 to C7 I believe shares 2. Most generations share maybe 2 max. Both front and rear sway bars and the end links as well. The shocks, both the front and the rear, interchangeable. The shifter itself, the shift box, upper and lower box, completely interchangeable. If you go to any short shifter website to buy one, it's going to ask you if it's for C5, C6, C7. The only difference is how the shifter knob itself mounts. Other than that, underneath, identical. Calipers. So the standard C6 calipers on the Z51 for the 2005 are identical to the C5 calipers. No difference there. But the later on models, the Z06 and Grand Sport calipers and rotors will fit on a C5. You just gotta make sure your wheels are big enough, because obviously the tires wheels on the C5 are a little smaller out of the box. The springs. The front leaf spring will fit. The rear, because how they had to change the control arms, will not fit, but it's very close. The front A arms, the spindles, both front and rear. Now, if you wanted to beef up the internals on your differential, the Z06 C6 internals will fit, and the internals just fine, but how it mounts on the outside is different. The seats are interchangeable between the C5 and C6. However, the electrical connection between the two do not fit, but there are adapters. So if you wanted a C6 seat in your C5, it's very doable. You just gotta buy a little pigtail, good to go. The C6, LS3, and LS7 clutch and flywheel will bolt right up to the C5. The tunnel plate itself, which runs underneath the car, right underneath the torque tube. The C6 T56 or the T6060, along with the differential and rear subframe, can be swapped into the C5 with very, very minor altercations. And lastly, the C6 knuckle will bolt right up to the C5. Now those are the things that are completely interchangeable between the two, with little to any modification necessary at all. I have seen in forums people take the gauge cluster from C6 because they like the LED versus the backlit incandescent bulb version of the cluster, and very, very minimal tweaks to it. They made it work in a C5. I'm not a huge fan of that, but doable with minimal effort. Again, I'm not saying the C6 was a lazy design, it's more of a natural progression of how good the C5 platform was. If you look online at the actual dimensions of the two cars, they are slightly different. That's due to the longer, if you will, body panels of the C5. The C6 does sit a little higher, however, it does have bigger rims, so you're gonna have a little bit of a height adjustment there. And obviously you can adjust the height on the C6 and C5 right out of the box with the adjustable bolts on the leaf springs, both front and rear, so you can get the heights to be pretty much identical. Now, somebody would argue that the C6 is what we should have got in '97. It's just a better platform. They're very similar. I understand that. That's very subjective. It's an opinion. I think we needed to have the C5 to get where the C6 was, just in styling alone. And interestingly enough, there are a few C7 items that fit on the C5. One I already touched on, that is the shift box and the whole shifter assembly itself. Pretty much the entire torque tube type assembly. The engineering is almost identical, a couple little tweaks and mods there. They had to change it for the new frame of the C7, but the basic principle engineering is almost identical with the rear transaxle as well. So there you have it, a quick little fun video rundown on what's interchangeable between the C5 and the C6. I thought you guys would enjoy this, just in case you're trying to find a couple of suspension components or miscellaneous little things, or maybe you want to swap out your seats or something. There you have it, they are interchangeable. So I hope you guys enjoyed this quick little fun upload, and I'll catch you guys next time. Mark out.